Hi, Namaste Yogis. I'm going to change my view for this recording so that we're both on. And the Today I am privileged to bring to you on this Father's Day, Joy Lanzerotte, who is a friend of mine. She is a longtime yoga teacher as well as an integrative, I'm going to say this wrong, Joy, integrative wellness psychologist. No, tell me how to say it.
It's all good.
What's the
licensed professional counselor, but I went the counseling psych, not school counseling.
And for 40 years, you've done that. Mm-hmm. She also is a founding member, she also was a lead trainer in a very good yoga teacher training program. And Joy, can you please share a little bit about that program that you were a part of?
Yeah, it was, I was selected as one of 7 for Avalon Yoga Studio. The owner was Paul, and he selected Ben Thomas, who's a senior certified Iyengar teacher who sat on the board in San Francisco. And in that process, there were 7 of us selected to offer teacher training over a 4-month period. And each one of us had a segment of that training. And I was designated to train in the area of principles of alignment, like how to sequence, when to stand, when to sit, body parts, and holding the seat of the teacher. That was my assignment.
You were trained primarily in the Iyengar style initially, correct?
No, I was trained in Kripalu initially, and then when I moved to Arizona, I engulfed myself in the Anyasara teachings.
Okay.
With a lot of international, as you know, Eric Schiffman since day one, but those are my 2 training areas.
So I've managed to get every single thing about you wrong in my introduction.
And we like each other because we have that humor.
I know. And then there's one last piece about Joy. Joy has just such a rich background. We're not going to spend this whole call talking about her background, but we could. And there's just one other piece I want to share, which is that you also were a public speaker. You made a living as a public speaker for a period of time. So can you just tell our audience a little bit about your public speaking work?
Sure. Back when I formed my business 2 years after my father passed, LifeWorks, I knew that I had a message and I wanted to get it out there. And my message was all about change. So I researched and studied and did a lot of work. And I went and formed my business, wrote a business plan, and then started doing free speaking engagements on change, the process of change, stress management, conflict resolution, and humor in the workplace. Those were my 4 big topics. And I started small, put a portfolio together, and ended up getting an agent called Talent Plus. And I still like to do the speaking. I spoke at the bookstore, I guess a couple of years ago, but that time it was on Valley Fever. But yes, public speaking and writing kind of go hand in hand.
Nice. And do you want to talk a little bit about writing at all?
Sure. What aspect of it? I love to write. Keeping a diary. I guarantee if you keep a diary, somebody in the family will find it and find what you've written very interesting. Whether you put it under the pillow or the bed, somebody will find it. It's back to haunt you, so you learn at an early age that doesn't work. I did a lot of work with Julia Cameron, Morning Pages, and it seemed to get me through those major issues as it relates to loss of a loved one, loss of a job, and I've moved a lot. I've lived all over the United States. Writing, I wrote profusely after my father died. I'm not Ernest Hemingway, but I could get into the altered state so easily, and I could write, and then it would get published, whether it was on change or humor. And then those publications became a venue for my speaking. And I spoke for several Barnes and Noble, several bookstores throughout the state of Missouri. And then I moved into corporate training.
And those were they articles, magazine articles, or were they, books? What were you publishing?
Actually, all the above. Whether it was like a Natural Awakenings paper that was located out of the Unity Church in Kansas City, whether it was the American Society of Training and Development, was very involved in staff development, so co-authored an article for ASTD.
Yeah, I'm familiar with them. They're the big training organization. They're the national, I was a member of that.
Yeah, so I co-authored with a woman who's the head of NSDC, the National Association of Staff Development in the education arena. So we co-authored an article. Grass is always greener, but you still have to mow the lawn. That was the title of the article. Then I published for some journals outside of Chicago on my work in change. I've done a lot of work in change with Venn diagrams, and I did a lot of study in MIT with Peter Senge, who wrote Systems Thinking. So I kind of I'm a closet nerd, even though I don't know anything about technology, as what you have just already discovered today. I like the mechanics. That's why I like the Anyasara, the Iyengar. I like the mechanics of the yoga.
Yeah.
I like the mechanics of things working in sync, the mind and the body and the heart, not separated.
I think that's why we have that connection, because we both love that, not just the sort of understanding intuitively of it, but also like, how does that work in our bodies? How can you explain to people how to enter an altered state through an actual process that you could document, or that you could, share with someone who may not understand even exactly what you're trying to do. So I think we both have a very deep interest in sort of the mechanics of transformative altered states of awareness.
Right, and in my workshops and in my publications, there's a step in between change and transformation. It's called transition, and that's how we choose to respond to imposed or intentional changes. So we got a lot going on in our country right now, and how people react or choose not to react, or whether we enter into dialogues where we can agree to disagree, are a lot of action research for me right now.
I love the pace of this conversation, and we had talked a little bit, and now we'll get into discussing the gifts of your father, Joe, on this Father's Day, a special conversation about how he's inspired you in your writing, in your speaking, and about his ability to hold the space and make the time for people. And I love how it just feels like that presence is here with us right now, where we're not rushing through, but able to really just have the time here to share as much as we need to about ourselves and about him. Can you tell me a little about your father? I know that he passed in 1995. When did he live? You shared a picture and it looked like a World War II? No?
No, my mother had a small baby, and so back then he wanted to go into the war. He enlisted, and he felt very shamed by it.
In World War II?
Yes, yes, yeah. He felt very shamed by it. He felt that's what you did. He didn't like Archie Bunker, in the sense that he liked the premise that you stand up, you put your hand on your flag, on your heart when the band goes by or whatever. When I think about the gestalt of my dad, and since we started our dialogue about him a few days ago, it's kind of like I'm going off with, those Twizzlers you light on the 4th of July. I've got all these sparklers going off. And in silent reflection, I came to it this morning. I feel for people who don't live in a home where there's safety and trust, the basic ground level. I always knew that I could go home. I always knew that everybody was going to have a comment. And because I'm the last one in the lineage, that means I had 3 parents, my brother, my mom, and my dad, because my brother's 8 years older than I am. So I had a lot of parenting and a lot of opinions. But I never realized until I left that my home was a safe home and haven. There was no fear of throwing glass or I mean, we argued, we're Italian. I mean, that's how we talk.
Or just a fundamental instability that
Yeah.
exists. So many, there's, actually, it's such a wonderful conversation to open up because on Tuesday, I'm going to be talking for Pride Month. I have a friend who's going to be talking about safe spaces. And, that took me a little while to understand what those are exactly. But sometimes I think people think like, oh, it's only about like physical harm. But I really think that it's, the ability to be in a place and just totally relax and know that your people are concerned about you and genuinely care for you, and that you're not in a chaotic environment. It can be a lot more subtle than just, people throwing a glass. It can be.
I'm going to tell you, living in that, I didn't think about it because all my friends had that. I mean, some had single families because of the war or whatever. My best friends, I didn't know her dad, but I don't remember the chaos. I mean, you could walk across the street and have dinner and sit down and not have to tell your mom, and you left the house is open and the car's unlocked, and it was a real community kind of flavor.
You shared with me that when we were talking about how to describe it, that I needed to talk about your father as a dad and not as a father. Exactly. And as a counselor. Can you talk about how you perceive the difference in those terms?
As a counseling psychologist, I've worked with all kinds of people in all different areas. But I've also got degrees in special education, and I was chief administrator of special ed at the University of Missouri. So I have seen it all. And putting myself through college, I worked as a waitress, and I remember this story where a woman came to work. It was Howard Johnson's back in the old days, Hojo's, and she was black and blue, very naive. And she said she fell. It wasn't until I got into my coursework in college that I realized she was a victim of abuse. So my dad, to me, a father, anybody can be a father. Anybody can leave their mark, and they can go the distance. My dad was a dad forward and backward. I mean, you always knew where you stood with him. You never had to figure out. I've seen my dad cry more than I ever saw my mom cry. And my dad was a sturdy guy. He was a guy, but there was a consistency with rules. And I don't know if that was because of my Catholic upbringing, but there was a consistency. And I was also studying the ballet simultaneously. So I was raised in disciplined systems.
So when you said that you were raised in Catholicism, I know, many people who I went to Tulane, and there's sort of a joke that it's, Tulane, but there's also, I think, probably about 40% of the people there are Catholic, and then probably about 40% are Jewish. And so I, like my roommate was Catholic. I knew many people who were raised in that. Although I wasn't in the South, that wasn't the predominant religion. So I've seen, for a lot of people, that means a lot of different things. Can you tell me a little bit about what it meant in your family? What were you like, every Sunday it's church? Or was it just more that there was this sort of guiding principles?
That's a great question, because when you're a kid, you do what you do. Like, even if you're growing up in a family where there's abuse or alcoholism, you think that's the norm because you don't have a comparison. You know what I'm saying? You don't know. So my friends were all Catholic. I went to Catholic grade schools. I went to a Catholic high school. And I even spent the first 2 years of my life in a Catholic college. And then I hit the wall. And by that, I mean, I wanted to go to a big university. And I wanted to know what else was out there. And the very first person who sat next to me in one of my college classes, Strawberry Blonde, was Jewish. So I got entrenched and studied Judaism. Now I couldn't, I could go to the house, the sorority house for Shabbat, but I couldn't go through all the other practices. And she was, she was conservative. But through that process, I found religions to be extremely interesting. And then I pretty much wavered. I never announced it at home. I mean, when I went back home for the holidays, we went to church. My grandmother, who immigrated from northern Italy, my mother's mother, my dad, loved nothing more than taking her to church. He loved it. He felt that was their special time. And I remember my mom saying to me once, I think he loves my mom more than he loves me. And as a kid, I'm thinking, I didn't know you could have a value on love.
Mhm.
I mean, to me, he liked her. He liked going to church. And he was the one that liked going to church when, after I had moved away and come back for visits. And we were sitting on a Sunday morning, he'd be dressed and he'd have his Bible and he'd say, "You heathens, anybody going with me to church?" But there was no judgment. When I got divorced, they weren't happy about it, of course, but there was not that attachment of judgment. But it was also
Which
much
a lot of
more.
people have experienced who grew up in Catholicism. So it sounds really lovely that you had, parents who used it, to guide their lives in the best way and weren't shaming you and, making you feel like the choices that you were making were.
Well, when I did get married, I married a man who was not of the Catholic upbringing. And I couldn't find any church in St. Louis to marry me because I wasn't a part of any church. That was interesting. I had to go shopping for someone to marry us. And my mother asked me, in honor of your grandparents, both sides, who came here and are staunch Catholics, I want you to be married in the church. So a Jesuit married us.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I didn't even know that they performed weddings.
Yeah, St. Louis University, in fact.
Oh, nice.
It was great. Yeah.
You said that you had really experienced, that you regularly experience your father's presence now that he's no longer with you and that he inspires you. Is there sort of a way that you connect with him, or is it simply that at times he sort of appears to you, or how do you connect to your father's spirit?
I don't go through all that, really. I just talk. I do. Because I'm solo, I don't have kids, and I'm not married, and I'm pretty much, treading water on my own, so to speak. I mean, my brother's back in Illinois with my mom, but um, I just talk. I'll just say, "Hey, Joe, what's going on?" Or, when I have a bout with my valley fever incident, I'll just say, "Hey, Joe," And when I was in the hospital, and this is kind of off the track, but it's very pivotal. I was very angry that I didn't die because I wanted to be with him and all my friends who had passed over.
Do you want to
That's
talk a little bit
a real
about,
statement. That's
because
a
I
real,
know what you're talking about, but
I know you do.
do you want to talk a little bit about what you're talking about being in the hospital? And
Um, when I got sick and I taught yoga that morning and went to the emergency room to have a chest x-ray. They thought I had pneumonia and found a black spot on my lung, and my lung was collapsed with a jelly over it. And it had been a collapsed lung for 2.5 months. Anyway, I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. I lost 70% of the lung. I had the last rites. And when I lived, I looked up at my dad and I said, I couldn't even get that right. I can't even get this right. I can't get dying right, you know? And I just, I had, I think unconsciously, I knew I was really angry I didn't pass over because living's hard. Dying's easy. And I do a lot of hospice work. I work with vets. Um, you either get on with living or you get on with dying. There's not a lot of in between on that one. But I felt that sense of abandonment that I was really now out there on my own. And he he was always there. He was the constant for all of us, for all of us. And it was after he died, it was interesting to see the strength of my mom. I mean, she was always strong, but we just all turned to him. I mean, that's how we were raised too, the man of the family. I mean,
Right.
yeah, he was a fix it, and I don't know. I don't know. Life just didn't seem all that difficult, except for basic things like illness or backing the car into a very large tree that you called a stump and put a lot of damage to the car. Those kinds of things you do in high school. But nothing. None of my friends in high school or even college, none of us were caught up in the year or something like that. But nothing that was. We didn't have any money for drugs, so we didn't. So nowadays there's this addiction called opiates. Well, we just didn't. We were all just doing the best we could. We watched our classmates being drafted. I don't know. It was a love-in the sense that we cared about each other. We didn't even know a lot of the people, but we cared about them. Even in the big university, we cared about each other. Everybody shared a ride because not everybody could afford a car. So we all got into one. And so, there was that real strong sense of community. And my dad believed in that. He believed in the town we grew up, the city where we grew up, that you participated and you supported the schools and you supported the church. And it's just what you did. And I never heard him say, I'm too tired. I don't want to do this. I never heard him say that. And I'm not naive. I never heard him say that. So, and we came by hard times and there were strikes and stuff. He would paint cars or fix bicycles or go pump gas at the local gas station. I know the rest of my family, cousins and stuff, didn't see that. So my brother and I in private schools and, but he worked a lot of extra jobs and he was a handyman. He fixed things.
It sounds like such an incredible gift to you, somebody who gave you this incredible foundation that you can always return to, of knowing what safety is. And it sounds like in your work as a counselor that you've been able to really share that with people who didn't have it and help them to create that for themselves.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because those days when he went code red on a Monday, and then the body starts to shut down, and he chose to do it without consulting any of us. His body started to shut down, and I would drive from St. Louis because I was living over in the city, and my mom and brother and sister-in-law were living in Alton. I would stay. They would go on home, and I would stay. And he would just chat, and that's when I did so much of my writing, because the pearls he gave me. The pearls he gave me. He used to talk about, I remember this one thing that I wrote about was called The Quality of Life. And he talked about people in your life who love you, your health, your head on straight, and a good sense of humor. And I looked at him and I said, Joan, he goes, cold beer is good too. And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, quality of life. That's all you need. And I guess that was, he was on his deathbed. And I remember driving back. I'd stop at Barnes & Noble and have a double, triple latte at 11 o'clock at night. And then I'd go back to the city where I lived in a high-rise, and I would write. Because every time I came back from that hospital, I'd look to see the flashing light on the answering machine. That's before iPhones, right? I didn't want to see that light flashing. So I've written about that too.
So it sounds like when your father, what did your father die of?
Chronic lymphatic leukemia. He was diagnosed in October, and he died January 7th.
But there was like a 3-month period where he was in the hospital and you were...
Well, actually, no. He was getting a lot of blood transfusions. It would go in and seep out, go in and seep out. And then
So he wasn't in the hospital for 3 months, but he was sort of in and out. of the hospital during that time?
He was getting a lot of blood transfusions and chronic lymphatic leukemia. So I remember that I was speaking at a National Staff Development Conference down in Dallas, and he was not in a good place. And I was in St. Louis, and I left the hospital in Illinois. And I remember I got a phone call from my mother saying, "Your dad's home, your dad's home." And what he did, Suzanne, he went home so I would go to that conference and speak because he knew I wasn't going to go. I said, no. I mean, I just remember that now as we're chatting, but he did. And that conference, wow, that's another whole story about how I wanted to go to the big ball in Dallas. It was being held at the hotel where we were all staying, staff development. And the person tapped me on the shoulder and says, "Do you want to go in?" And I said, "Yeah," and I got to go to the ball. Because I knew when I came home, I was going to say goodbye. And I came home from the conference, and the day after I got back, he went back in the hospital. He spent Christmas in the hospital, New Year's in the hospital, and then he died January 7th. And as I told you before, I stepped out of the room to stretch, and that's when he passed over. Yeah.
I'm sorry for your loss, Joy. I know it's been a little while, but I know on Father's Day it's
Every day for me.
More present.
Yeah. It took me a long, long time to and so many of my friends knew him, my friends in high school, my friends that I worked with, my friends from would come over from St. Louis for different events we'd have, because Mother was such a good cook, and I'd schlep them over there, and it just mi casa su casa. They loved it. They loved it, because we didn't have a big family.
Did you? It sounded like your writing was a way of processing the emotions that you were feeling as your father was starting to transition. And you said that you continued to be, really be in a transformative period when he died. I know you had other friends that died around that time as well. Did you, was it writing that really characterized that period of transformation for you? Or was there other aspects to it?
That's a really great question, because as you're asking me that, I went back into that period of time. I could not process he was gone because he'd always been there. I'd go to college and I could pick up the phone, or he hadn't heard from me for a while. He'd pick up the phone. "Okay, how's your head? How's your heart? How's your health? How's your humor?" I mean, it was the same standard 4 questions every time. When he passed, I just couldn't process it. Now, I'm a very physical person, so I have a bicycle. I would go out and live on the edge, and I would ride that bike with my hands off the handlebars in Forest Park. I was a runner, so I was running all the time. Anything, kind of like Forrest Gump, I just kept going until I couldn't stop. In the meantime, I had an artist book that they draw in, and I would go sit in Forest Park. And I was working, don't get me wrong, I was working, but I would take that, and sometimes I would just draw. And I remember when it was the Day of Atonement, and I had gone to fast for that day, I had this big book, and I played with the word atonement, and what came out was at one moment. I kept playing with all these words, and I still have this big book. And it was things like that: intimacy, into me see. So through that, there was no judgment, kind of like why I like yoga. There's not to be any judgment, no attachment. I can't draw, forget it. It'll be a stick figure that's just pitiful. But the writing and the movement, the dance, the running, the physical component related to the creative component of writing, absolutely. It's something you don't need a lot of equipment for.
Right.
And it's a brain drain. It's like a bowel movement in the brain. You don't hold it in there, you get rid of it.
I can sort of see it, this period where you're going inward and processing in your body and sort of bringing words out of it. You had said that your dad was like the original yogi, and you grew up in a Catholic environment. How did you, how did it feel when you started yoga? Was there a sense of confusion about that at all, or was it because of your upbringing? Did it just feel like a natural thing? Because I know some people who are raised in very religious environments sometimes have a conflict about yoga. And even today, I see many people who come in and say, I was raised evangelicals, religion. Somebody recently gave me a thing. I can't even tell if it's a joke or a real thing that, there's someone head up in the Catholic Church saying that yoga is like demon worship. And so I'm just kind of curious, and, especially at the time when it was more, people were more in the mainstream religion. Can you talk a little bit about
that's a great question, because, and think about it. By that I mean is I was teaching fitness classes. I was a dancer, and I taught dance down in the city of St. Louis, jazz studio. I was counseling and doing all that stuff too. I had a full-time job, but these were always my little side things. But when somebody saw me and took me into her studio, who was the one that introduced me to Eric Schiffman, Lynn McGee of Big Bend Yoga in St. Louis, it was so hard. Just downward facing dog. I thought she forgot us. I was looking around. I didn't think about it as a religion. I perceived it more as kind of like growing up in the Catholic faith. It's a discipline. You got to get your head on straight. You might want to kick the pew in the church because you're tired of the wooden kneelers. Toe shoes had metal toes on them. So a lot of what I experienced in yoga was not the black and white. It was more of a discipline.
And also, it sounds like the physicality of prayer that's in, things like Catholicism, Judaism, and traditional Judaism. We don't do it so much in Reform, but there's the davening and the physical movement of prayer. And it sounds like it almost felt like an extension of both the disciplines of dance and then the disciplines of the physicality of prayer from Catholicism.
And I never thought of yoga as a religion. When I started the yoga program at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in 2008, a lot of people on staff there would not come because they saw me kind of like a witch, and I didn't chant and we didn't do meditation. So I didn't follow my training at all. We just did asana.
It's interesting because, Kripalu yoga is, it's very much not just asana. There, like when I studied Iyengar, many of the teachers really didn't talk about, so they didn't really talk about philosophy at all. But my Kripalu teacher, it was clear to me that it was very much a part of Kripalu, and you said that's how you started out. So
I did.
Interesting
that. But I feel that for me, I've always been that way. I've always had that cell. My dad had Boy Scout troops, and he was, a godfather for 2 Black students in his Boy Scout troop that were in school with my brother's age, because they didn't have parents. They had a mother, but they didn't have dads. So my dad was their god. So I kind of grew up where, I told you the story how he helped the guy with the motorcycle and the guy in the wheelchair, and so, I just kind of I just saw him do that.
Like you have this strong grounding and self-care, and then also extending that care of yourself to others. And that's why yoga just felt so natural, because you already knew that.
I guess so, yeah. The piece of me that I wish I could change is that I'm super sensitive. I'm just reading a book on it now, and I saw it in the bookstore. not sensitive, super sensitive, which makes me good as a teacher, which makes me good in hospice, working with vets, counselor. That works. That's because you have that empatico, the compassion that they talk about in our yoga practices for other sentient human beings. But it gets in the way in everyday living. So that's kind of like my yoga off the mat. It's not about you, because they don't call you back for 4 months. It's not about you. You know, the cat died. Oh, you got a cat there. I should have picked.
Oh, yeah, I know. I didn't really, my kitty Beignet is assisting me by.
Oh, wonderful.
He's right off camera.
Yeah. So, you know, I don't want to make it out to be that he was perfect. Oh God, no. I challenged him. I was the devil's advocate. I would challenge him. I would challenge him about the religion, not disrespectfully, but, you know, I'd ask him questions like why he would never let me go out with a guy that looked like Jesus, you know, in dresses and long hair and sandals, you know, hung around with a bunch of guys. That didn't settle well. No, there was no humor in that answer. I mean, I wasn't impugned, and I wasn't disrespected, and I wasn't hid. No, God, you know, he just looked up and said, the smarter you get, the stupider you get. And that was the end of the discussion. And that's pretty much how I went to school.
That should be my motto. The smarter you get, the stupider you get.
Because I had all the degrees, right? I had 4 degrees, but, you know, but I also knew how to learn. And I'm that way in any kind of like little think tanks. I know how to ask the question that might get under someone's skin, so I can get a real depth of what their perspective is, not just the, you know, and I don't know where that comes from. It's just part of me, but I've always kind of been a loner. I wasn't a sorority girl. You know, I guess it's the sensitivity part. I'm pretty much an introvert. I can get on a stage and talk to thousands of people or teach, but I'm not good at small talk, meaning I don't have kids and I don't have a former husband I want to complain about. You know, I might talk about the baseball game, but you know.
Well, there's a couple of things, and then I'm going to stop the recording.
Sure.
One is what we had discussed, that your dad had this ability to just be really present to people, and that he always had, you know, when he was with someone, their full attention, and that sense of being able, as you said, your dad was super busy. He was in the church. He was Boy Scout leader. He did, you know, had all these extra jobs, and he said, you know, but somehow there wasn't, it sounds like from the way you describe it, not really a sense of being rushed. Can you talk about that quality that he had? Because that has come up in many calls, that feeling of feeling hectic.
You know, the solstice is coming up on Wednesday, and I'm going to lead a yoga class, and it's going to be very intense in the sense it's the solstice, it's the 3rd annual global yoga gathering, and it's a huge meditation with Native Americans. And it goes along to your answer. The theme, I call it the iPhone. We say we don't have health and this and that and this and that. That's the phone talking. But we take the eye away from the phone. What is it we're truly, really lacking? And my sense is when we sat down at the table, there were no other things going on. We ate civilly. We didn't gush. Somebody didn't eat in another room. We sat down and honored my mother who cooked. And we had a discussion. And he always asked us what we learned. What'd you learn? What'd you learn? If you started to complain like that, he ended it. I don't want to hear it. I can go to work and hear people complain all day long. And he'd get up from the table, and whoever job it was to do the dishes, my brother or mine, because we had division of labor in our house. That was huge. And by that I meant I mowed the lawn, I swept, my brother cleaned blinds. There was no gender differentiation. So, and Dad had projects. So after we had dinner, he would go work on projects. Maybe it was fixing a car, or he and my brother were building the basement in our house, fixing up a basement so my brother would have a place to go with his friends. He was busy. He was busy, but there was no iPhone. There was no internet. There was none of that. And my take is, those aren't the enemies. We've given them the permission and allowed it to control us. Yeah, it connects us. Facebook is great. I mean, I found people I've gone to high school with that I haven't seen, and now I feel like I'm back part of their lives again, or people in college. That's nice. But on a day-to-day basis, it can be very time consuming.
And distracting.
And then when I watched 60 Minutes last week, there's a research study where that's all set up to stimulate the brain, kind of like your Skinnerian, stimulus response kind of thing, the behaviorist mentality of, I haven't been on phone, I haven't checked my Twitter account. And so it's all set up to create that kind of mental distraction, which is why, interestingly enough, meditation is so popular today. And now we see all the good benefits of just getting out of our own way. But Dad he just never talk about it. That's why we knew he was sick, because we'd just see him in a chair and he'd be sleeping. And we knew something wasn't right. We knew that. We knew that on the 4th of July when he was sitting there, and he wasn't Dad.
Right. He wasn't able to stay doing his important things, which
didn't have energy.
His community.
He was losing blood.
And then I felt like there was another piece that I wanted to do on the wrap up, and now it's like escaping me. So we'll just go ahead and let it wrap up. And if I come up with it later, I'll maybe put a comment below the replay. But I want to let people know that, first of all, I just want to thank you for taking the time to share. I really did feel like your dad's presence was here with us today. And especially in that way that you described, that sense that of him being, oh, I know what it was. That's exactly it. You said that you let people, when you do counseling with people, that you talk with them about how to tap into the presence of people that are close to them in their lives, in their work. I was wondering, do you have a little specific technique that you can share with people who are watching this on replay for doing that, or any kind of instructions that you give to people, so that if there's people in their lives that they were close to help them connect to?
There's always somebody in our lives, and if we're blessed to have more than 2 or 3, that has made a difference. Somebody that believed in us more than we believed in ourselves. Somebody, maybe it was a coach, maybe it was a teacher, maybe it was a friend. It was somebody that left an indelible mark. So when I'm counseling somebody, let's say with cancer or a vet battling some depression, you want to not focus on the dreams too much, and get them out of that arena and thinking out bigger picture. And who was it? And you take them down that memory lane. You take them back. Was it somebody in school, or who showed up at the birthday party and brought you a good present, or who showed up to Thanksgiving dinner with something special just for you? You learn to work our experiences and weave them into the person, and present what I call a salad bar of options for them. What on this salad bar do you resonate with? And some days it's soup and dessert. Some days it's only salad. But it always varies, and it's always changing. But the constant is the salad bar and the utensils, and you have to pay. Those are the 3 constants. So that's pretty much how I work with my clients. I don't do talk therapy. They've had enough of that.
Wait, I don't get it. There's a salad bar? Mm-hmm. What's the utensils?
Those are the things that you use to connect with whatever you're going to put in your mouth. So when you go to a salad bar, you have that constant. There are going to be options. all different kinds. There's going to be soup, and you know there's going to be your utensils.
Okay.
And then you know you're going to pay. And so it is in life. You've got cancer. You've got some options. Some days you just want it over with. You just want it over. And other days you're very hopeful. But you still have the confines of the drugs. You still have those things that are used to assist you with your body. Maybe it's a naturopathic approach, maybe it's an IV. So I try to use metaphors when working with patients. And who used to take you to get ice cream? Who used to slip you 25 cents and nobody told you? You know, like my dad would give me 25 cents, don't tell your mother. My mother would say, here's 25 cents, don't tell your dad. I mean, they just did that. But the salad bar is only the metaphor to get the person, and I'm only using it with you, but it's getting the person to relate to someone in their life, or more than one if we're lucky, that made a difference. And that's the person we call upon when they're facing chemo, when they're in stage 4. Maybe like the woman I was counseling a few months ago, she was going to have 2/3 of her liver. And I said, who in your life, when you think right now as a kid or in your home, who jumps out at you as being somebody, wow, they were so cool. Maybe the way they dressed or, you know, the car they drove. And she said, it was my grandmother. And I said, what's her name? So we named her liver Cecilia, because that was her grandmother's name. And there's a song, right? Cecilia. So I baited her with the options of the salad bar, so to speak.
Okay. So she does, one of the options that people have is sort of where they're going to put their energy. And one of the ways that they can connect to a different option is to find a person in their past that had a positive energy and excitement and thrill for life.
It could be a pet. It could be a pet. People are very attached to their horses. It could be a lot of things, but the thing is not to be misunderstood. I've published on this, the salad bar of life. There's the constant. That conjures up an image for you, a salad bar. You know, it's got a tray and plates and utensils and napkins, and then you slide it down, kind of like the old-fashioned cafeteria, and you pick what you want, and you got your soup, whatever else, your drink. Those are the constants. That's the framework. That's the blueprint. But what we go for is what makes the meal digestible. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And what's the payment part?
We always pay. None of us have a get out of jail free. None of us. We all know in the end, we all know that life is suffering, yoga, and we all know that eventually we will pass on. We know that. This is not, if you believe in more lives, great. If you don't believe this is the only one, great.
And so you're working with people who are talking, facing that, that payment of life in one way or the other, and the pain of life, the suffering of life. And so that idea of paying is that idea of, okay, this is something you can't get out of. You got to do that. That part is not going away, but you still can choose the meal that you have in front of you.
Exactly. You can have a happy meal or you can have pain. It's up to you,
But don't have a literal happy meal.
The thing I ask every person I work with, doesn't matter whether it's there for a relationship change or a job change or a move change or a wedding coming, are we going to get on with living? Or are we going to get on with dying? Because how that question and how I observe those facial features in that body tells me.
And so when they're about the person. Choosing that person that's going to be a part of that sort of meal for them, is there a little technique that they can use, or is it just more holding them in their awareness as they start to make their choices?
Boy, I'm not, as you can tell, it's like in yoga, like Eric Schiffman. we get our really solid foundations, and then we have the freedom. And that's pretty much, every person is very unique. But in all the patients I've counseled, and when I worked at the Edgar Cayce Medical Clinic, there were people from all over the world. The patterns are pretty much the same. They just are. Everybody wants love. Everybody wants health. Everybody wants to be accepted. And everybody wants to have enough money to live. And then there are those that want more than that. But the basic ones, the basic Maslow, the hierarchy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm going to end the recording. Thank you so much for being here, and we can stay on afterward and talk a little bit. But let me just press goodbye. Thank you so much, Joy, and we'll put links below to join the Sadhana community if you're not already a member. And Joy, I'll put the link into whatever links that you might want to websites. I know you have some websites up, but I'm not sure which ones you might want to share with people right now. So I'll ask you and we'll make sure. But there'll be information about Joy in the link below. And be sure to look at other Meet a Yogi series here for the Sadhana YouTube channel. And then we also have a special section for the Yoga Alliance, which at some point maybe I'll have you on to talk about that. We've been doing a little research project about the Yoga Alliance, and I have several videos up about the Yoga Alliance. So we'll do that'll be for another business corner. Sometime we'll talk about that. So thank you so much, Joy, for sharing your wisdom. And namaste. Or as I say, and Kripala Shai Pakwan.
Absolutely.